The tradition of the president giving a Super Bowl interview started probably at, 20-ish years ago. In the case of NBC this time around, there was an hour sit down. I listened to the whole interview today so that you didn't have to go back and look at it yourself. Savannah Guthrie is the daughter of the woman missing, and Nancy Guthrie. And we're into day 9 here. This is what we sort of are gathering from the media reports and from what we're seeing, but we're not getting a lot of on the record statements from law enforcement that are pushing us towards one direction or another. Do we see a new criminal prosecution related to Jeffrey Epstein start in any meaningful way? What does this look like? What does justice really look like here? We're back to that question. This is really fun. Our insiders are on the live chat right now for this live broadcast, and they are throwing a bunch of brand new ideas to us at Smarter News. By the way, welcome everybody. It is Monday, February 9th, and we are moving right along post Super Bowl into the Olympics. We got a lot of news happening this week. It's going to be a really exciting week of headlines. I say exciting, and then, I want to do the knock on wood, throw salt over my shoulder. You never know what the week is going to bring, but we have a really good show for you today that's going to get you prepped and ready. What the insiders are doing now are throwing new ideas at us because I just announced to them, because they're insiders, they get a special discount and they get a heads up on some new gear that we put out. It's just one of the many perks they get for basically buying Smarter News a cup of coffee once a month. So we stay ad-free as possible. Occasionally on YouTube, there's an ad, and occasionally, let me think about, if you listen on podcasts, there's going to be an ad, but we try to keep this super, super, super streamlined, because if there's one thing I hate in this world, it's pop-up ads and distracting ads that just make it more difficult for you to listen to or hear about the news. So we don't want to do that. We're not trying to flood our website. Our whole news platform is about decluttering the news space, and that also includes ads. But one of the ways that we help fund Smarter News is really through our insider subscriptions. So check it out if you can. It's Smarter News. You just go to Scoop. That's the insider group. We'd love to see you there. It's a very, very low bar for entry. I bought a cappuccino yesterday. I think I bought an iced coffee yesterday. $6.50. It's cheaper for you to be an insider, and it lasts longer. All right. So think about it. It's just one way that you could support us. But also, I give our insiders special discounts and fresh looks at some gear. So we have a new gear item that we're releasing on Friday that is related to the news over the last several weeks. We're really excited about it. And I also asked them, well, what other gear item could we sell as a promotional tool for Smarter News? That could be a bit of a fundraiser. And one of the things that I'm seeing is car stickers, which I love that idea. Car stickers. So if you have any other ideas, let us know. If something's lightweight and doesn't involve sizing, that's a win for us. When it gets more complicated than that, we're just not a big enough company. So anyways, just one of the many plights as a small business owner that you learn through entrepreneurship. And I'm excited for everybody to see our new item that we're going to have up live on our website starting on Saturday. So just something to look forward to, if you're doing a little Valentine's Day shopping, just something to look at. In the meantime, it has been a big weekend of news with the Olympics and also the Super Bowl. Just want to start with the Super Bowl very quickly. Does anyone know why they called the singer Bad Bunny? I thought that was important. When you're like, everybody's saying something, but nobody knows what it really means. I know there's mixed feelings about Super Bowl shows all the time, but then I thought to myself, why is his name Bad Bunny? And why do we not actually tell the backstory to that? Is there an interesting backstory? Briefly, there is. When he was young, he was dressed up as a bunny for school, and apparently he didn't like it. So he had a scowl on his face. And therefore he looked at that photo. He's like, I was a bad bunny. And that's how he got the name. Bada bing, bada boom. It's over. But that's kind of interesting. I thought that was an interesting backstory. Also very interesting. We have a lot of players that were able to talk about their backstory a little bit more. And one of those players is the Seattle Seahawks quarterback. And he's had a meandering route in the NFL. And he said something that I thought was important for us all to hear at the end of the game. So let's take a listen.
What does this moment mean?
It's unbelievable. Just everything that's happened in my career, but to do it with this team, I wouldn't want it any other way. So proud of our guys, our defense. I can't say enough great things about our defense, our special teams. I know we won the Super Bowl, but we could have been a little bit better on offense, but I don't care about that right now. an unbelievable feeling, man. I'm just so happy for the guys in the locker room and the coaches that put in so much effort throughout the whole season.
You mentioned everything you've been through, all the ups and downs, all the teams. How did all of that experience help you get to right here?
I think that's it. I think all my teammates, all my coaches I've ever had, always believing in me. I've always believed in myself because of my family and my friends. So it's as simple as that. As long as you believe in yourself, anything's possible.
Congratulations.
Well, it's as simple as that. Let me just pause that for a second. It's as simple as that, but it's not necessarily easy to do all the time, especially if you've been in the NFL for 8 seasons, but you've been traded across 5 teams, which is what happened to Sam Darnold of the Seattle Seahawks. So he had a victory. You have the MVP, Kenneth Walker, who, if you've seen interviewed, he's a very ferocious player, very fast. But then when he talks, he's like very calm. And apparently that's part of his locker room demeanor. That's his reputation, is very calm, very polite, very composed, sort of soft-spoken, but a ferocious player. What's interesting about him, he's Super Bowl MVP, but in high school, he actually got clots in his lungs and he had to be in the hospital. And there was a real question about whether or not he would be able to continue playing, but here he is, Super Bowl MVP. And one more great story from the Seattle Seahawks. Back in 2014, the head coach, Mike McDonald, began his NFL career. He's super young. He's 36, okay? Super young as the head coach, winning the Super Bowl. But in 2014, which was the last year that the Seattle Seahawks won the Super Bowl, he was an intern. And now he is the head coach. He wasn't an intern at the Seattle Seahawks. He was an intern in the NFL. And now he is the head coach of the Super Bowl winning team. So just a few kind of interesting stories there. It's easy to get a little disillusioned with sports sometimes, right? Because there's a lot of money, there's a lot of fame, you know, celebrity, all that stuff. But there's some really great stories in sports too. So I just wanted to mention those to you because it is a very uniquely American event, American pastime. And so there we are. Football season's over. What are we going to do the next few weekends? Nobody knows. This is just sort of the dark ages of winter. And we're going to try to get through it as best as we can. And luckily, we have the Olympics. And I know you know the news already, so I don't need to get too far into it. But one of the stories that was so prominent going into these Olympic Games was about Lindsey Vonn, the Olympic skier, the champion, one of the most celebrated women skiers of the sport. She has this terrible injury, unfortunately, going into the Games in her final competition before going to the Olympics. She tears the ACL. And she says, you know what, I can compete anyways. Now, I actually talked to a member of our Smarter News community who used to be a physical therapist I used to see in New York City, Patricia Lattis, by the way. Great. Just want to give her a shout out. She's amazing. So I'll put a link in our show notes in case you're in New York City. You should go see her. She's incredible. And she treats a lot of athletes. And I asked her, I said, hey, is this, what about this ACL injury? Is this okay for Lindsey to try? And she said, obviously not ideal, but, possible. Unfortunately, as we all know, Lindsey had a really big crash about 13 seconds into her run that ended her Olympic hopes and unfortunately involved a fractured leg. At the time of this recording, we don't know too much about the injury, but I do want to share something with you that I just saw this morning that I thought was super, super interesting. And I didn't know too much about this. Perhaps if you guys are really into skiing, you already know about this. But I want to show this to you that these downhill skiers are wearing some gear. There might be a little music in this, hopefully not. This is from, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Dane's Official. What people are seeing on the screen, in case you're watching on podcasts, again, this is something I'll put in the show notes, is actually an inflatable vest that skiers wear. And turns out it is required. I'm going to read from the AP here. You can see what we're seeing on your screen is somebody else that's crashing. And as they're starting to fall, this inflatable vest is inflating just slightly to protect them. So I'm going to read, this is from the Associated Press. The mandatory safety airbag inflated under her racing suit. This is Lindsey Vonn's racing suit during the crash. Supplier Denise confirmed to the AP. The airbag, which is triggered by a complicated algorithm when racers lose control, may have softened her landing. Obviously tough to know. It was evident that the airbag had opened because Vonn's chest appeared puffed out when she was lying on the snow. The person who works on the safety system for these devices said the airbag deflates after about 20 seconds. So that likely happened while Vonn was lying on the snow after her crash. Eventually, listen to this, they will retrieve a sort of a black box, a sensor that could reveal the data of the fall. This is a quote from the person that is in charge of the safety system. She was wearing it when they took her away in the helicopter, so we haven't gotten the data back. I didn't know anything about that. Doesn't make the crash any worse, but what a fascinating invention. So, and gosh, I mean, you think about the things that we do now, right? That we didn't do before. People have helmets on. I'm like wondering, when do we get a mass market of that for your average skier? Maybe it already exists. Excuse me. I'm not really a skier. So perhaps if you're listening live or you're listening later, you know more about that than I do. But I thought fascinating technology that I didn't know that one existed, but also that there would be some data that could perhaps give us some more insight, how fast she was going, exactly what happened when she fell. So sort of in a fascinating thing just to learn about. And we want that to be part of our news cycle too. What can we learn? It can't just be about the headlines and the crash over and over again. What can we learn, and how is technology and invention trying to solve problems out there? So let's go back to what's going on with the news. There's going to be a ton of Olympic news this week. We got a lot of big events really for the next 2 weeks. So we have a lot to look forward to, even though football's not around. We're certainly going to be watching the different news coming from overseas, coming from Italy. In the meantime, back here in the United States, we have a very, very active congressional session, meaning there's going to be a lot of hearings that we're going to see this week. We're going to cover topics from what's happening with immigration to what's happening in Africa to what happened in Minnesota. We're going to be looking at jobs data that was supposed to come out last week, but because of the partial government shutdown, did not. We could potentially see, this is actually moved, I believe, till Thursday, a space crew launch, a SpaceX crew launch that we're expecting this week. Sorry, a little frog in my throat here. Where does that expression come from too? Frog? Hopefully not, because that would be a surprise. Either way, I just need to clear my throat. I apologize. There's also going to be, we're going to see Pam Bondi on Capitol Hill, the Attorney General. We're going to see the heads of Immigration's Customs Enforcement back on Capitol Hill. So you know that these are going to be very kinetic hearings where you're going to potentially see a lot of conflict. We're going to be monitoring those for news, but just so you know that that's going to be taking place. So if you start seeing that, wind up in your inbox, you're on social media, you see headlines, just know these are scheduled hearings on these topics. And because of the guests that are coming to testify in front of Congress, we expect to see a lot of action. What I want to do at a time when we have a lot of news is we're going to just look, I want to focus in on the legal cases in front of us this week, because we have 3 very different legal stories that I feel demand a little bit more time. And so let's talk about them. One has to do with this missing person story that continues in Arizona. The daughter of the mother of Savannah Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie is the daughter of the woman missing, and Nancy Guthrie. And we're into day 9 here. It's believed to be day 9. So it was last weekend. So not this past weekend, last weekend when it's believed that this kidnapping took place. And now it feels like the media has really coalesced around this theory that was first floated last week, especially during these press conferences with the local sheriff, about a ransom. And the reason why the media is coalescing around this is because we have new videos coming from Savannah Guthrie and her siblings talking about being willing to pay a ransom. And this reporting around this has led to some timelines and some numbers. And can we independently confirm these numbers? Can anyone? It's a very strange story. There's so many different parts of the story. I'll get to that in a second that leave me paused, because it needs all these asterisks, right? Reportedly, purportedly, allegedly. This is what we sort of are gathering from the media reports and from what we're seeing, but we're not getting a lot of on the record statements from law enforcement that are pushing us towards one direction or another. So I have to just add that caveat, because apparently there's a deadline tonight of this evening that there needs to be some sort of ransom exchange, $6 million of value. Is it in Bitcoin? Is it in cash? And where is it supposed to go? What is it supposed to do? We don't have any news on that. We just have that the story is continuing. And to provide this level of context, I've covered the news actively now for 20 plus years. I don't remember a story at all close to this one. there's a variety of different crimes and kidnappings, home invasions that I've covered. But the way that this story has unfolded and the information that's been both provided to the public by law enforcement and then not provided at all doesn't feel familiar to me in any way. There are times when the press can be both helpful or hurtful to a case. That goes without saying. And in this case, it's taken a really long time to sort of answer some basic questions like what, when, how, where, why. We still don't really understand the motive that could be attached to this kidnapping. Is it just for ransom? Why was Nancy Guthrie targeted? What about is it related to Savannah Guthrie? What is this all about? So there's really big holes in this story. And some of you asked on our live chat earlier, what are my thoughts about it? My thoughts are I'm feeling very hesitant to report further on it because I can't quite get my hands around verifiable information. And I'm concerned. At this point, we are far down the road. At this point, just from a media perspective, let me just take that because that is my expertise. If this goes into a second week, does the media attention grow on this or does it start to fade away? That's going to be part of the story too. It already feels like there's a certain less amount of urgency because we had some big news events. Super Bowl, you had the Olympics opening ceremony. Some things distracted from some of these other stories. And so without the media focus, if there is someone behind this, what happens? If a ransom is paid, is she returned? It's just a very strange mystery. And I know that's very unsatisfying to talk about at this point, but I just think this is very unprecedented. And there are some questions and reports surfacing about how law enforcement is handling this. That always happens. It always happens if something extends longer than 2 days. So we're going to reserve some judgment without any more information. We can't go further on that, but certainly I'll be watching when do we actually get press conferences and what do those press conferences look like? Last week it was very repetitive. So do we get actually new information and maybe some more explanation about where law enforcement is working in and around Nancy Guthrie's home and some other properties, apparently her daughter's property as well, who lived in the area. So very mysterious and not a lot there. Let me see if I have a question here on our live chat here. I'm seeing a lot of comments about why this is being covered when other kidnappings never get this kind of attention. Thoughts on that? It is true that, if we could look at missing persons data, unfortunately, this is for someone to go missing is not necessarily uncommon. And certainly if someone is attached to somebody else who's rich and powerful, it's going to get more attention. Absolutely. It's going to get more attention if just speaking about media bias or media selection or editorial decisions, a young, attractive woman is going to get a lot of attention than a young man. We could look at gender, let alone race or looks or anything else, age. In this case, I do think this is getting attention because it's just so strange. There's still, again, no motive. And the target, an 84-year-old woman, is not your typical target. And without the motive and understanding around it, it just is a very strange case. So number one, having NBC assets, being that this is a story that's connected to a high-level NBC personality, that those resources are going to be at the story. Absolutely, no matter what. That's going to bring more national attention because the other networks look at each other and think, well, if you're going to do that story, I need to do that story. And there's competition. They're looking at what's happening on each other's screens, even if there's not as many viewers anymore. They're still watching that. So that has sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. It's self-fulfilling momentum that the media then sort of builds on it. Well, okay, NBC is there, ABC's there, CBS has to be there. Okay, Fox News, now there's CNN, TMZ. Okay, now these are all connected. So there are reasons that feel very attached to the story, being that the target is not someone that we usually see, but then also the connection to the media, it's going to get more attention. It just is. And that would be true, I think, of, quite frankly, anyone of any age that was attached to a media personality. So I am curious if because we keep on hearing that said ransom communication is going to different media outlets, but it's not, it seems sort of like a jigsaw puzzle. It's not like it's going to NBC in New York. It feels like it's going to TMZ or going to local stations. I am curious in the aftermath of this, how that's looked at. and who actually received those correspondence first. Was it really these media environments? Was it law enforcement? Was it the Guthrie family? We have so much to learn, unfortunately, with this. So keep on looking for a break in the case. And as of right now, Monday, 9 days in, 9 days in, we don't have a break in the case yet. And that, unfortunately, is the takeaway for today. Two big cases I want you to pay attention to, because these can get sort of pushed under the rug, and it's something that everybody's dealing with every single day. And I'm talking about social media. Two separate cases that could lead to unprecedented follow-up legal pursuits. So we're looking at these cases not just for what matters in front of us. We look at these cases related to social media because there's 2,300, an estimated 2,300 or more lawsuits filed around the country by local, state, federal government. I mean, it could be in a lot of different levels. Right now, it's in the local and state governments. We're not seeing federal government cases, but we see more than 2,300 cases that are percolating and waiting to see, could they go to trial or what's going to happen next? Could there be cases that then get settled? Let's just talk about what these two cases are, because both of them are starting in trials today. And there was a big question about whether or not that would ever happen, because in the past, you could see social media companies, including in some of these cases where one was involved, have stepped out. They've paid the person, they've settled, and they stepped out because they don't want to be part of a trial. So one case is in LA, and it's brought by a young woman who says that essentially her claim is that these social media platforms are set up to be addictive to children and have accelerated or exacerbated her depression and suicidal thoughts. So prosecutors took that case, and that case is against Meta, the owner of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, as well as Google's YouTube. Snapchat, TikTok were involved as well. They settled. They're out of that case. But right now it's going to trial. There's opening arguments in LA this week. In New Mexico, there's a separate case also accusing social media platforms of basically not standing back and knowing that their platforms can be abusive to children because there's not enough safeguards in place, according to these attorneys, to allow children to safely participate in these platforms. This is a different sort of case, though. So the LA case, there's an actual person that says, this is what happened to me, and I'm going to court. In this New Mexico case, it's the state. The state actually set up an undercover investigation and created accounts for young people, but there were no young people. And they said that these young people were able to come into contact with criminals, and that there weren't enough safeguards in place. And therefore, these companies like Meta, for example, know that this is the case, but aren't doing really enough about it. In general, the response from social media companies, just to summarize it, I know it's not going to be a surprise to you, is that they say, listen, we're working with parents, we're working with Congress, we're doing everything that we can to protect users. We're not responsible for all of this activity, and they are protected somewhat from this because of law. That's their theory, that they are not responsible for all the content that's online. And therefore, they're not responsible, unfortunately, for this person's experience or the experience of other children. What they're going to argue in the case of the person that's bringing the case is that, unfortunately, she had these issues anyways. It's not just because of them. And in the case in New Mexico, they're saying, well, we're doing all these things to safeguard, and we're being very responsible. We're being responsible business owners. New Mexico doesn't agree with that, and this is where this case is moving forward. So what we want to see is how far do the cases actually go to the end? Because it could be that you could get a settlement sometimes in the midst of a case. Not always, you could have that happen. But there's a potential that Mark Zuckerberg could actually have to testify, at least at the trial in LA. So what do these social media platforms say in these cases? And they're fighting for something here. It's not just about their argument in this particular case. If this woman is able to successfully bring this case, which is a pretty high barrier, remember, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? It's high. If it's successfully prosecuted in the state of California, what does that mean for these other 2,300 cases across the country? that is a green light for other lawsuits. And because of that, then the question could be, well, what does that mean for these big companies? And also what changes could come because of the threat of more litigation. So we're watching these cases very closely. We know what social media, all the questions that you have about your families, how we all feel on social media using it. So we're going to watch these cases, first of their kind, getting to trial this week. All right, another big case that we're watching, cases, and it's not an active case. We talked about it quite a bit last week, so I'm not going to talk about it at length today, but it deserves to be readdressed because we do have some news on the Epstein files this week. Just 2 quick housekeeping news items. We do have Ghislaine Maxwell testifying today. She was invited. Let me just make sure I have all my ducks in a row here. She's scheduled to testify today before the House Oversight Committee. This is a very powerful committee in the House. The House is majority run by Republicans, so they're running this committee, and they are going to be asking Ghislaine Maxwell for a virtual deposition. So she's not going to Capitol Hill. This is happening virtually, and they're questioning her, presumably, on the activities related to Jeffrey Epstein. She can plead the fifth and she doesn't have to answer any of those questions. So we don't actually know what could come of this. We also know that she's challenging the charges against her that she was convicted of. So we're wondering, what does this mean? Where does this lead? We don't know, but it's happening today. I think it's important that you know that as well. Thomas Massie, a Republican in the House, who's been very outspoken with Ro Khanna, a Democrat, who's responsible for getting the Epstein Transparency Act passed through Congress. He's apparently headed to the Justice Department or going to have a way to review unredacted files. So remember, the Justice Department released all of these millions of files of different kinds, and there were redactions, some that were controversial. And what these lawmakers are saying is that they want to see the unredacted files. And the Justice Department said, okay, come over and see them. Where does that lead? We don't know. But for Thomas Massie, he feels like this is really important because he believes, and he has said, that others should be charged with a crime. That if Jeffrey Epstein was being looked at for human trafficking, is he the only one? Is he the only one involved here? And there seems to be obviously a very unresolved feeling by politicians and also those in the public about, wait a minute, what actually happened here? And what are we to make of all of these names that we see in the files and the names that we don't see in the files? Like, what are we supposed to make of this? This is the byproduct of something that is very unprecedented, releasing investigation material to the public. Because in any other scenario, this investigation material would be behind closed doors at the FBI. And as the FBI has said to media outlets and the Justice Department overall, is that if investigations are ongoing, they're continuing to use these files appropriately for that. And in other ways, they are concerned about releasing them because there's names of people that are not criminally related in any capacity. Like we talked about last week, my name was in the file, unrelated to anything. It just happened to be on an email forwarded about an event. Still sort of weird, but not related to the case at all, So we're seeing that still the fallout from that this week, although we'll see where the story winds up after this deposition and then also after what Thomas Massie sees. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, is going to be on Capitol Hill. Surely she's going to have some questions about this case. And one can think back, one of the things that she said when she first got into the office is having a client list on her desk. That led people to imagine, rightfully so, what would a client list look like? If this person was facing crimes for human trafficking, one would naturally think a client list would be for human trafficking. These are all the guys that are guilty, right? That's the assumption. The question is, was that a correct assumption? And when she said a client list, was she talking about a client for crimes, or was she talking about Jeffrey Epstein's clients because he was an investor? What does this all mean? Is there a sleight of hand here? And that's very difficult with this story. What does all of this mean, and what about justice? So let's talk about justice for a second, because many of you had some very good questions about the statute of limitations. Wait a minute, if there's victims out there and they say that something happened to them, why are we not seeing more cases? And that's something that the Associated Press just reported on this past week. And apparently the Associated Press and other media outlets are sort of combining resources to untangle the millions and millions of documents. Very interesting effort. I don't know if I've seen that before, but the Associated Press talked about it this week. And one of the things that they said that they learned is that the FBI said, well, if we found something and we felt that we couldn't prosecute it on a federal level, then we would bring it to the state. And then the state has to decide if they're going to prosecute it. So this is something key. When we talk about human trafficking, the FBI gets involved because it crosses state lines. It's a federal charge. When we're talking about abuse of a minor, I'm just going to use very gentle terms here because I know you might be listening with family. If there's a crime that involves a child, typically, let's just take the state of Florida where Jeffrey Epstein had a home, there's no statute of limitations. So if it was an adult, it could be several years, short period of time, less than 5 years. You'd have to bring charges if there was a crime that was committed against an adult. When it involves a child, very typically states don't have a statute of limitation for that. Or they're advocating to allow more prosecution because those are the most vulnerable in society and need to be protected. However, a prosecutor still needs to feel like they have enough evidence to bring a case to trial. And it is important reminder, it may sound a little repetitive, but in America, our justice system is set up on something very unusual and very important. You are innocent until been proven guilty. You're going to be judged by a jury of your peers, and you have to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. These are very key parts of our justice system, and it's very important for prosecutors feel they can reach that very high bar. So in a crime case where we're looking at there's a crime being committed, we're going to try to prosecute someone, it's not just enough that a victim says that this happened. As most times, there needs to be more evidence. And this is where we ask questions of our legal system, where we could see that things could potentially have happened that were unethical, immoral, and evil. And the question is, does it reach the bar for prosecution, where a prosecutor is going to take up that case because they believe they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And that's another bar to hit. And so the question here is about, when we're talking about justice in a traditional way, it's nice to have that refresher that we remember that it has to reach that bar. And unfortunately, in some cases, it may not. And justice isn't found in a court of law. Multiple things can be true. There could be a real crime that's committed. There could be victims. And it can also be true that the crime, because of when it occurred or how it occurred, a prosecutor could say, we believe a crime was committed and we do not have enough to bring this to trial. And that is the sad reality that exists. And I don't want us to lose that here. I'm not suggesting that applies to everybody that has claims against Jeffrey Epstein or his associates. But I do think that's not really getting elevated in the press. Politicians in the press are finding ways to use this story to get more attention. And this is just a fact. That's just a fact about the justice system. Now, in a civil court, I could hire my attorney and I could bring a case, and it doesn't have to, a prosecutor, or state or local government doesn't have to say, oh yeah, I'll take that case because it's a crime. So civil cases don't have as quite up a high bar, but they still have a bar. You still have to reach a certain level to prove that case. And there's also a cost associated with it, a financial cost. And also, as victims have mentioned, there's a social cost to it too, that some of them feel threatened. And perhaps I'm just giving you this one scenario so we can consider all sides here. There could be a scenario where a victim feels very confident that they know that someone committed a crime. They're not able to prosecute them criminally for whatever reason. They've been told that that's not going to happen. But civilly, they're wondering and weighing bringing a lawsuit. Financially, if it's worth it for them. Personally, if it's worth it for them. And one would, we'd all love to think that we would just charge ahead, right? Because we're going to make sure that this never happens again. These are some real things that these victims, that they say that they're victims of a crime, are considering, and they're up against these obstacles too. Again, it can also be true that there can be real victims that also don't have a pathway to pursuing civil prosecution. That's true of criminal prosecution and civil prosecution. And that's just one of the realities. So I want us to keep that in mind here, because it does feel like you have a lot of people searching for things, right? They're searching for that something hidden that the Justice Department missed. And perhaps, we have seen the public be very helpful in crimes. I am actually not convinced that the public is not going to find something here that could lead us to another path in this story. But I also want us to be very clear that multiple things can be true at one time. And again, going back to that phrase, it's unsatisfying to hear that. It is still the reality. So let's see where it goes from here. We'll see where we wind up at the end of the week. Let me see if there's any questions on that, and we can go from there. Okay, I'm going to move on to just something very quickly. Let me see if there's quick questions here on, let me see if I can pull this one up. Haley says, I'm so curious about the testimony of the alleged victims. Have they not identified the alleged perpetrators, or can they identify them publicly so arrests can be made? I'm glad you brought this up. Let me see if I can pull up this X feed. Matt Walsh is a conservative commentator. He tackles a lot of different topics. I'm going to show you what he said on X last night that's related to this. The reason why I got attention is because Elon Musk jumped in to this. And so this was a conversation around a Super Bowl commercial where victims were talking about what happened to them. And there was a series of allegations. Some of these victims are I don't want to say well known, but well documented in that they've come forward before. So they're talking about the crimes that were committed against them. And I'm just going to read you some of what Matt said here. He said, I'm all for releasing the files. These women could also just name their abusers at any time. Instead, they've embarked on a months-long publicity campaign, which curiously didn't start until the exact moment Biden left office. They profess to know the names of child rapists in the most powerful positions in society, yet they won't tell us. They'll even take out a Super Bowl ad while claiming to be silenced, even though they're the ones refusing to give us the information they say that they have. Okay, consider his point of view, which is true. They can actually, someone could say the name in public. They could also face a lot of consequences for that, including being prosecuted themselves. So there is a calculation there. Matt Walsh goes on to say, for those claiming that they can't name names because they'll be sued, they could simply give the names to any of their many and mostly recent advocates in Congress who could read the names out loud from the floor, insulating themselves and these women from any litigation. But they refuse to do that. Why? It's an interesting question. I don't know how much reading from the floor of Congress insulates people from prosecution. It does set a very dangerous precedent, though, that if we start reading the names of alleged criminals in Congress and there's not an actual crime committed, then what precedent have we set? Something to consider. So in this exchange, at some point, Elon Musk jumped in and said, I will pay for the defense of any woman facing prosecution for any, facing any repercussions for saying something out loud. Will that change someone's calculation? Maybe. But there's a lot to consider here. So, and it can be difficult when some of those choices and decisions, none of them feel good. We'd love to not have to talk about abuse of children at all. The question is, what does justice look like here? And how do we prevent anything from what we're hearing happen again? Because clearly, as we think of the number of victims, again, more than 1,200 that we know from the Justice Department, and we know out of the handful of people that have been abused, you have like one that will come forward. So we have to exponentially, just based on statistics, think how big that number is. It's a lot to think about. So what does this look like? What does justice really look like here? We're back to that question. So more on that as we get it. But for now, we're still kind of in the realm of public opinion, the court of public opinion, and we haven't seen any actual new criminal prosecution start. So what I would say is that's going to be very critical for this story. Do we see a new criminal prosecution related to Jeffrey Epstein start in any meaningful way? That would be very important. And we'll see if accusers suddenly feel like there is isn't that interesting? I say accusers, alleged victims, like to call them victims. It's hard to double it. It's even that word choice. It's a tough place to be. The bottom line is we don't want to see any children hurt. We don't want to see anyone hurt. So how do we make sure that the Justice Department protects the most vulnerable? And how do we make sure that people do bad things face justice? I mean, it's plain and simple as that. All right, let me just play for you guys real quickly here. I have a couple sound bites from the president I thought would be really important for you to hear. The tradition of the president giving a Super Bowl interview started probably at 20-ish years ago. That it was happened during the Super Bowl, that there could be a live interview. It could be very short. You could be like 5 or 6 or 8 minutes, 10 minutes. In the case of NBC this time around, there was an hour sit down. A portion of it aired at some point during the Super Bowl broadcast, but it was a little different than the past. I listened to the whole interview today so that you didn't have to go back and look at it yourself if you're not interested. If you are, I'm going to put it in show notes so that you can, because it was an interesting interview. I have to say, I think of this, there's a lot of, President Trump does not hide from the press. Shocker. He engages with the press on a regular basis. So you do hear a lot from him. This was an interview that was not aggressive. It wasn't caustic between the two. There was actually quite a lot discussed. And so I pulled some of the most important things for you, and I thought you'd enjoy this. So let me play. This is one of the most important topics we've covered in recent weeks. This is about immigrations and customs enforcement. And Tom Yamas of NBC is asking the president about the last several weeks. And he starts with a really basic, simple question, but the simplest questions often are the most important.
Speaking of Minneapolis, what did you learn?
I learned that maybe we can use a little bit of a softer touch, but you still have to be tough. These are criminals. We're dealing with really hard criminals. But look, I've called the people. I've called the governor. I've called the mayor, spoke to them, had great conversations with them. And then I see them ranting and raving out there, literally as though a call wasn't made.
After the shooting of Renee Good, you said ICE made some mistakes. What were the mistakes?
Well, look, I'm not happy with the two incidents. It's not, it's both of them, not one or the other. He was not an angel, and she was not an angel. You look at some tapes from back, but still, I'm not happy with what happened there. And nobody could be happy, and ICE wasn't happy either. But I'm going to always be with our great people of law enforcement, ICE, police. We have to back them. If we don't back them, we don't have a country.
You mentioned Renee Good and Alex Peretti not being angels. Do you think any of that justified what happened to them, though?
No, I don't. It should have not happened. It was a very sad, to me, it was a very sad incident, two incidents. And, they mentioned the one now, they don't mention the other. Well, I think they were both sad. And who feels worse about it than anybody? The people of ICE.
So I want to be clear, because it sounds like there is a shift in immigration enforcement here, that there's going to be a shift after Minneapolis. What should Americans expect going forward?
Well, one thing I say to my people, we do a good job. We don't get credit for it. I say they have to ask and they have to say, please. When a city is going
who has to ask and who has to say, please?
The mayor or the governor. I don't want to go and force ourselves into a city, even if their numbers are terrible.
Which cities are you headed to next?
We have 5 cities that we're looking at very strongly, but we want to be invited. We will sometimes call the governors. And
are
say,
these cities like Chicago, Philadelphia? Are these the cities?
We could straighten out the crime in Chicago. We've already brought it down 25% just by being there.
So some words from the president on what has been a very controversial topic, the actions of immigration and customs enforcement on the ground in Minneapolis. As you hear from the president, he says, listen, he doesn't like what happened. He feels like a softer touch should be used. That was his expression, and that they've made some changes. And so we'll see if that course correction is applied in other places and how it happens and ends up still ongoing in Minneapolis. At the end of last week, as many of you know, we got the news from Customs and Border Protection that we're going to see fewer ICE and Border Patrol on the streets of Minneapolis, but it's still quite a bit than what's normally there. So waiting and watching to see how this plays out in the state of Minnesota, whether or not it can be an enduring cooperation that's taking place between what's known as a sanctuary state and federal law enforcement, will be very key to understanding where this story goes next. Where immigrations and customs enforcement goes next has been a big question. And whether or not that's in Chicago or Philadelphia, that'll be also interesting to watch. What's actually important this week, though, is to know that partial government shutdown that unfroze last week because there was an agreement about funding is still on the horizon, that we could see a lack of funding for the Department of Homeland Security, that basically we need an agreement on the path forward or additional funding by the end of this week in order for there not to be a partial shutdown of just the Department of Homeland Security. Remember, that was part of the deal that Democrats and Republicans got together and said, okay, fine, we're going to fund the government so the whole thing can be reopened, but we're only going to give a little bit of funding to the Department of Homeland Security because we want, Democrats are saying, we want, and some Republicans, we want some more reassurances that immigration and customs enforcement is going to do things differently than we've seen in the last several weeks, whatever that means. Now, we heard from Tom Homan that the money from this new bill, funding bill, is going to go potentially to body-worn cameras. And especially in the state of Minnesota, that all of the federal law enforcement that are acting on behalf of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol should be wearing those shortly. So that's news. And that would also be interesting if everybody gets outfitted with those body-worn cameras, because it has been a policy of the Department of Homeland Security, but they've also said, yeah, but we don't have the resources to do it. So a couple things to watch there. Just know that the Department of Homeland Security funding runs out by the end of this week. Here's another soundbite from the president. He's talking about the elections. Let's take a listen.
One thing you can do really to help Americans find common ground.
Well, you know, we're working on the Save America Act, which is going to secure up a lot of things, but secure up our voting. I think people would like to do it, and I think Democrats would too. You know, when you go to voter ID and you ask Democrats, it's polling at 82% with Democrats. I'm not talking about Democrat politicians. I'm talking about Democrats. We have to do something about our voting. We need strong borders. We need a fair press, which we don't have. And we need, and very importantly, we need the strong border, the fair press, and we need fair elections. We need elections where people aren't able to cheat. And we're going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get it done. And by the way, it polls, even with Democrats, they want that.
I'm curious, this is a question I actually have for all of you, whether or not that is a priority that you think that Democrats and Republicans can actually agree upon. In a time when there's a lot of division, sorry, lost an AirPod. When there's a time of a lot of division, what do we think about that? Do we think that that actually is a common ground place that everyone can meet, and that by the midterms that there's going to be something better in place? Very curious your thoughts on that, because obviously there's a lot of distrust on all sides. So who would lead that? What does that look like? Can the president actually do that? Is his administration too politicized for it? Even if they did make changes, it wouldn't be trusted. So do you think that's a place where there is some room for common ground? I'm curious about that. Here's one other statement that the president made. It was actually about artificial intelligence, which I think a lot of people are talking about these days, but doesn't necessarily get bumped up to the top of the news feed with so much going on. I want you to listen. You know, Tom Yamas was saying, hey, listen, you are the president that's going to be part of shepherding this whole era in. And he had some questions about that.
AI affects humanity in a negative way. Is that on you? Because some of these CEOs of AI companies say we need guardrails. This could get out of control. Does that worry you?
Everything's on me as president. You know, everything's on me. I can say this: it'll be the greatest jobs producer. It'll be the greatest military producer. It'll be the greatest medical producer. There'll be tremendous good, and there'll be probably some bad too.
Well, it's killing a lot of jobs. And what do you say to Americans who are going to lose their jobs to AI?
It's going to create a lot of jobs.
But right now, it's taking jobs in a lot of ways. It's taking jobs at companies like Amazon. What would you say to those Americans?
But it hasn't really started. You know, these major plants haven't even been built. What you're going to see...
but Mr. President, AI has already started to take jobs because the technology is there.
So we have, it's just announced, more jobs right now occupied in the United States of America than at any time during its existence, 250 years. There are more people working today than at any time in the history of our country. Pretty good stat. That kills that question.
Yeah, we have to look it up.
That's a good answer. That kills that question.
Mr. President, there's widespread concern that AI is going to wipe out a lot of jobs, manufacturing jobs.
They said the internet was going to do, everything was going to do, robots are going to kill jobs, everything's going to kill jobs, and you end up, if you're smart, doing great.
I'm laughing because it's just the president was so proud of himself in that moment, because he's like, that was a great stat. In the middle of that interview, it was great. It was great. Okay, you know what I did? I asked AI if that stat's correct. Are there more Americans employed now than any other time in history? I thought it was just poetic justice to ask ChatGPT about that and provide the answer. The reality is that, yes, that is true. there are more Americans working right now in the United States than any time in history. But like most statistics, you have to take a little bit of a deeper look there. There's also more Americans than any other time in history. So it would make sense that more, as far as the number, are working than before. We have a bigger country than before. But here's what's also important, that we're looking for how to adjust for population size and employment rates. So is your percentage good? Of the people that are able to work, how many are actually engaging in work? And what is the percentage of population? Because that way we account for just the population getting bigger. And the reality is that as a percentage of the working age population, employment isn't necessarily at a historic peak. So in the number, yes, more Americans working than ever before. As a percentage of the working age population, employment isn't necessarily at a historic peak. So just something to think about there. Let's ask chat right now. Hey, chat, are you taking American jobs right now? Let's see what chat says. Let's see. Usually chat's very nice about these things and a little diplomatic. Nope. I don't hold jobs, earn wages, or replace workers directly. I'm a tool people use. Okay. This has been a big debate as well. How much is AI actually going into the workforce and eliminating jobs, where AI can do the job of a bookkeeper or an accountant, or in some cases, an assistant, a researcher? How is that really affecting the job market? I just want to caution you on the statistics that you see. You're going to have some people, Tom Yaman said it there, hey, it's already affecting the job market. There's mixed thoughts on that. And so how could technology not impact jobs? That's true. Is it actually stripping away jobs in a mass way right now? There's some mixed thoughts and data on that, for what it's worth. So thank you, chat. I appreciate that. A tool, we'll see. I don't know. We'll see. This is one of the final things that the president was talking about. And I thought the word choice here was very interesting, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. So let's take a listen.
In the new ballroom, we hear about this new art you're building, the Garden of Heroes as well. You're building a lot of things that are going to cement your legacy. Are you also doing this so the country never forgets you?
No, I think we need glamour brought back to our country. We need prestige. We need beauty brought. I mean, in addition to everything else, we need strength. We need all of those things. Like I'm doing an arc, they call it a triumphal arc. 57 cities have arcs. Yeah. We're the only major important city. Washington, D.C. should have maybe the first arc. Yeah. We're doing one that will be more magnificent and larger than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. I would say the Paris arc is probably the most
stunning.
It's incredible. We're going to do one that's going to top it.
Is it true it's going to be 250 feet to mark the anniversary?
It'll be about that, yeah. But it'll be a little bit taller than the one in Paris. It'll be a little bit larger than the one in Paris.
So I was curious what you thought about the word choice there about glamour. The president believes that that's what America needs right now. And we talked about the 250th anniversary and talked about what he thought also needed to be reflected in those moments of celebration in the country. But it was that word choice of glamour that I was curious your thoughts about. Do you think that's what America needs, is to bring back that feeling of prestige, the feeling of something special, and do these things like an arc bring that to the capital city? And does that help Americans sit up a little straighter with their shoulders back and feel better about the country, even if there is a lot of debate? Is that what's needed right now? Do we need to bring glamour back? And is President Trump the right president to do that? He says it's a top priority. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. It is interesting to see we're in a time of a lot of great change. AI is changing technology and the way that we work just on a regular basis is happening very quickly. So I'm seeing some questions about artificial intelligence pop up on our feed, and there's a lot of different places to go with this. Because, for example, let's say data centers are a big topic of conversation. You still need some sort of infrastructure to fuel technology. Well, in those cases, how are building those data centers also creating jobs while you're creating technology that's going to eliminate others? And we're in a time of a lot of change, and that doesn't always feel great. I see a question about elections. Just a side note on that. Remember that the federal government does not run elections. States run elections. That's in the Constitution. That's why every state has a little bit different way that we vote and the way that early voting happens. It's up to the states to be able to do that. And so, sort of a federal taking over of elections as prevented by the U.S. Constitution. So we'll see, though. We'll see. What could change? What could change in that? I'm not sure. So we'll see. I see one of our audience members, Jen, says we don't need to show. We need morality, integrity, and honesty brought back. I like that. We need to slow down. I like that as another perhaps something that we need, maybe perhaps to Glamour. Barbara says we need things like trust, honesty, and integrity. Leanne says we need peace and kindness, not glamour. So I'll let you guys continue that in the comment section. Thank you for joining us today for the scoop on the news and all the many different variety of stories that we're covering this week on Smarter News. If there's one or another that you would like us to prioritize, please let me know in comments. We want to make sure that our reporting is not just matching, hey, this is what's happening this week, but hey, let's drill down on this topic. Let's talk about artificial intelligence, or let's talk a little bit more about these social media cases. If you have interest in any of those areas, if you need to talk more about the Epstein files, I mean, this is why journalism exists. And I was also laughing when the president said something about the press. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. But the reality is that we're in a crisis of confidence for really so many of those in a leadership position, and the press is included in that, and we're in part to blame. So thank you for being a part of a solution in news. I appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to deliver to you quick, concise, nonpartisan information during this time of great change and evolution. So thanks for being along for the ride, and I'll see you with more on smarternews.com. Have a great week, you guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.